So let's talk through some of the very greatest Space Marine heroes in Warhammer 40k, with a review of every chapter master in-game at the moment, and how they stack up relative to each other. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Space Marines once more, and in this video I thought we'd take a look at each and every chapter master in the current game, what they bring to the table, and how strong they are for the cost. In the lore, Space Marine chapter masters are basically the commanding officers of an Astartes chapter, responsible for the grand decisions of leading their army through the trials and difficulties of the Warhammer 40k galaxy, and often taking personal command on the battlefront in the hour of greatest need. To be a Space Marine chapter master is both to be a peerless commander and a mighty warrior in their own right, able to duel and strike down the enemy's best and brightest. If slain, the chapter master is usually appointed from the surviving captains of the chapter's regular companies to bear the mantle onwards and lead their chapter to further greatness. In-game, in 10th edition, the chapter masters really have quite different strengths and abilities depending on their chapter's focus, plus their own war gear and equipment. They fight a bit more differently compared with things like, say, chaplains that often do similar sort of things, or the various Space Marine librarians. From 9th edition changing to 10th edition, they changed the rules a bit, in that there aren't really any rules for generic chapter masters now. I guess you could represent standard ones by using the various captain datasheets if you wanted to, but currently the only ones that you can field are named ones, and there have been a few ones that have been removed, like the various Forge World ones who had their rules sent to Legends. It does mean that you'll only ever be able to field one chapter master at maximum due to the rules on no mixing and maxing chapters within the same army list. Though I feel like Games Workshop does maybe have a bit of a focus on making these miniatures pretty interesting for their relative chapters. It would maybe be a bit sad if your army's nominal leader just wasn't really effective in game. For this one, I thought we could go through each chapter master with current 40k rules and give them a very rough power ranking. I'll try and rank each one out of 5 for how I'd rate them in game at the moment. First up, we have the chapter master of the Raven Guard, Kayvaan Shrike. The Shadow Master fights with a jump pack, so can move across the board really quite quickly at 12 inches, gets a relic pistol called Blackout with the precision keyword, and the Raven's Talons gets him to attack with 7 attacks at strength 5, AP 2, damage 2, and they both have precision and twin links to reroll the wound rolls. He's 100 points to field, and you can either field him as a lone operative if you run him individually, but if he does join a jump pack unit like say the Jump Intercessors or the Vanguard Veterans, then he gives them essentially the Lone Operative special rule, meaning that they can't be shot outside of 12 inches. He also gets the fun ability to be able to jump off the board if it makes sense. That could allow him a big reposition if that's going to be more sensible compared with just using his movement. Though I feel like perhaps a lot of the time it's just going to make sense to keep him moving across the board. He does move really quite quickly, and if you do redeploy him, then the chance of making a charge is going to be a bit unlikely. Overall though, I do think that Kayvaan Shrike is really quite strong for the cost. Making a big unit of jump pack intercessors or Vanguard veterans unable to be shot I think is really quite massive. Means that you can have them safe from long range enemy guns and pick and choose fights that they can win hopefully. Plus he does contribute pretty significantly to their melee with those reroll wound rolls, helps them punch up against things that are a little bit tougher. I think in general I'd be more tempted to field him with the squad, though you genuinely could just field him as a complete lone operative and sort of do similar things to the Calidus assassin. You trade the ability to kind of ruin a stratagem with some better melee and some slightly better defense, but he could do a similar thing bouncing around the board doing secondary objectives. Overall I think he is very strong. I've chosen to rank him a 4 out of 5 here. I feel like he does have the disadvantage that a few named characters have though, in that if you take him then you can't take literally any other chapter specific units, as he is literally the only one for Raven Guard. I feel like if that wasn't the case, and Raven Guard also had a bunch of other interesting units or characters to put on the table, we might see him a bit more. Moving on, and next up we have Pedro Kantor, Chapter Master of the Crimson Fist, famed for leading the bloody defense of Rin's world against the invading orcs, and leading his shattered chapter on the road to recovery and future greatness. Pedro Kantor costs 90 points and he gets some fairly snazzy war gear. He has a 2+ armor save. Dawn's Arrow for a fairly well souped up Storm Bolter with sustained hits, strength 5 and damage 2, and some punchy melee in close combat with a Fist of Retribution at strength 8 and damage 3. Otherwise his 2 other special rules are damage boosts for the unit. In one command phase you can choose to add +1 attack to your unit for the entire turn, and that applies both to ranged weapons as well as melee weapons, which is kind of interesting. means that you could have Stern Guard firing out 4 shots, or Blade Guard all hitting with an extra attack for a turn. As well as that, as his squad takes casualties, you get some other damage boosts, +1 to hit if they've taken a casualty, and +1 to wound if they're below half strength. Overall for his cost, I do think he's really quite solid once more. His damage and defensive numbers are fine, having a punchy damage 3 melee weapon is a big advantage of these alpha level heroes. The big single 1-game punch with the extra attacks is definitely meaningful, and the squad damage thing might be situationally handy. He honestly seems fine with any of the company heroes, Stern Guard or Blade Guard. Doesn't really make too much sense with Tactical Marines though, I think. I feel like overall he does maybe bring a little bit less unique to the table compared with say Kayvaan Shrike with his big lone operative rules, and for that reason I have chosen to rank him at 3.5 stars out of 5 rather than 4. I feel like he feels in a bit more firm competition with the other Space Marine characters with the interesting stuff that they bring. Things like free stratagems from captains, or lethal hits, or being able to take enhancements and things from lieutenants. Still though, really quite strong, definitely not a wrong choice. As with Shrike, he does lock out other character options though. Next up for 185 points we have Marneus Calgar, Chapter Master of the Ultramarines, and pretty well famed as an all-round god of war, defending Ultramar against all comers, and victor on a crazy amount of battlefields, whether fighting Eldari, Tyranids, Chaos or more. Interestingly, Calgar comes as an 185 point unit with him and his 2 Victrix Honor Guards. The guards also gets to join any squad that he joins, so it does make the unit really quite chunky, as their stats are really quite impressive in their own right, getting a 2+ save and 5 attacks at damage 2 that hit on a 2+. Calgar himself gets the Gravis armor keyword, and he has a 2+ armor save on that. And with the mixed armor marks within the unit, Games Workshop has allowed them to join the vast majority of the Space Marine squads out there. Most of the standard Tactica stuff, but also the Gravis armoured units, so he can lead things like Blade Guard or Aggressors with really quite a lot of good choice. He gets some Twin Links damage 2 bolter shooting from the Gauntlets of Ultramar, and they punch very hard in melee with again strength 8 and damage 3, but the Twin Links keyword means that they're really good at punching up against tougher stuff. And between him and his guards he has a lot of melee threats. He allows his squad to shoot and charge after advancing or falling back. Pretty great for the unit's mobility, and really nice for slower units like say Aggressors. And on top of all that, each turn he generates a command point as well, helping out the rest of the army as well as just his units. Overall, between all that, despite having the highest points cost out of any of the chapter masters, he is generally seen as a very competitive unit indeed. Good melee, bringing a surprising amount of his own defense. It's quite nice with Aggressors that you could use the invulnerable saves of his guards to tank big high AP hits if you wanted. And it's really quite a big bonus to Aggressors or Blade Guard, where you could even throw in a Lieutenant or an Apothecary Biologist as well. Overall, really quite strong. I've chosen to give him the full 5 stars out of 5 here. Certainly one of the best and most valuable chapter masters around. Next up, we're moving on to Dark Angels, and Supreme Grandmaster Azrael is the chapter master here, recently having received a very nice new miniature from Games Workshop. He can lead most of the normal Tacticus type squads, and he fights in combat with his Lion's Wrath Combi Plasma, which actually gets strength 8 and damage 2. Really nice that Games Workshop actually let it maintain the plasma profile when lots of combi weapons lost it, and then has the Sword of Secrets in melee, 6 attacks at strength 6 and damage 2 with devastating wounds. For his points cost though, the amount of buffing rules that Azrael gets is really quite spectacular. Again, like Marneus Calgar, he gets the thing where he generates 1 command point per battle round, and on an 105 point model that is a really big win just in itself. But then he also gives his units sustained hits, so better damage output there. And maybe even more interestingly, his Lion Helm gives this unit a 4+ invulnerable save, turning a 3+ armoured Space Marine unit into something really quite tanky. He really just brings a surprising amount of value to the table for this low points cost. Overall, between all that, at the moment I would say that for the points cost, Azrael is the single best unit in the Dark Angels Codex, perhaps one of the biggest staples and competitive lists for them. I feel like between those 3 rather interesting buffs, there's actually quite a lot of scope for using him in different units, maybe more so than some of the other chapter masters out there. Blade Guard will probably make good use of his melee profile, and they'll like the sustained hits. Hellblasters will both like the sustained hits and the 4+ invulnerable save. It does feel kind of appropriate for Dark Angels with plasma weapons as well. Now he can join the company heroes, they've become a really interesting choice as well. They should be able to keep him safe while he generates the command points, and between 4 wounds, -1 to wound and a 4+ invulnerable save, he makes that unit spectacularly tanky. And even things like a cheap intercessor squad isn't exactly the worst. You could even just hold down a home objective and rustle up some command points for a while. Maybe being a little bit braver later game if it makes sense. In any case, really strong. Kind of borderline auto include for Dark Angels. Again, I'd give him the full 5 stars out of 5. Next up, we have the Whirlwind of Carnage that is Gabriel Seth of the Flesh Tearers. 90 points for the commander of the brutal Blood Angel successor chapter, armed with the enormous chain axe Blood Reaver, striking at 6 attacks, strength 8, AP 2 and damage 3 with sustained hits. It allows his units to advance and charge, and get some extra attacks via Whirlwind of Gore, or an extra one for every 5 enemy models within 6 inches. I feel like the amount of units that he can join is a bit lacking though. It's probably going to be best with the Assault Intercessor squad, which could give him some reroll wound rolls against enemies on objectives, but kind of a shame that he neither has Blade Guards to lead nor any unique Blood Angels units, given that their melee ones are either Death Company or Jump Pack bound, which maybe isn't the best for Mr. Seth. Overall, I would say that compared with the other chapter masters, he's really not bringing too much to the table. The damage 3 melee with sustained hits is definitely nice, but the AP is a bit worse than some. Advance and charge is okay, though it sort of depends on the detachment as to how valuable it is. And the Whirlwind of Gore special rule is kind of fun, but probably not usually going to amount to anything crazy. Overall, between all that, I've chosen to rank him a 2 out of 5. I feel like they could have made his melee just a little bit more savage, if that is going to be his first and primary focus. Sticking with the Sons of Sanguinius though, and next up we have Commander Dante of the Blood Angels themselves, the tired and aged commander of the Imperium Nihilus, making war clad in his golden armour and with the death mask of Sanguinius resplendent on his helm. As with many of the Blood Angels, he fights with a jump pack, which means that he can either lead the jump pack intercessors, vanguard veterans, or sanguinary guard, and he will be getting to melee really quite speedily. In combat, he hits home with really quite an impressive amount of attacks, 8 attacks at strength 7, AP 3, but only damage 2 compared with some of the others. He does get lethal hits with that though, so it's at least fairly likely that he should get some wounds on his target. Otherwise, he gets a Relic Inferno pistol with damage D6, Melter 2 and sustained hits D3. Gives his unit +1 to charge for making them more likely to make combat, +1 to hit for his unit both at range and in melee, and the Death Mask of Sanguinius forces the enemy to test Battle Shock, meaning that you might be able to prevent enemy stratagems in the fight phase, or possibly even stop the enemy from contesting end of turn secondaries. Overall, I feel like he brings quite a lot to the table. His melee profile is fairly nicely general purpose, strong against both Space Marines, and can punch up a little bit. +1 to hit and +1 to charge are 2 nice simple melee boosts for his unit as well. He feels like he should be most at home with his Sanguinary Guard, also boosting their fairly punchy Inferno pistols as well as their melee. I think it would be kind of nice if Games Workshop did help out the Sanguinary Guard a little bit. They are a bit overcosted at the moment. If and when Games Workshop moves them to be fairly competitively costed, Dante might be even more relevant. I feel like he's pretty interesting still with jump pack intercessors though still. And in that unit you could potentially combine him with a Sanguinary Priest with jump pack as well, between the two making them into really quite a scary squad. Overall I think he's usable enough for the Blood Angels. I've chosen to rank him a 4 out of 5 overall. Hopefully Games Workshop help out the Sanguinary Guard sometime in the future. Next up, we have the Great Wolf of the Space Wolves, Logan Grimnar, a chapter master who's not afraid to carve his own path in the 40k universe and challenge the Imperial hierarchy where it makes sense, even famous for coming to blows with the Grey Knights at one point when treacherous inquisitorial machinations threatened Fenris. He's got 2 datasheets in Codex Space Wolves. You can either field him in his Terminator armor or on the back of Storm Rider, his wolf-drawn chariot. The Terminator version is this one at 100 points and can join the standard Terminator units or the Wolf Guard ones. In combat he fights with the Axe Morkai, 6 attacks at strength 8, AP 2 and damage 3, though he can fight with an anti-horde mode if it makes sense. And his big special rule is the High King of Fenris special rule, which means once per battle in the charge phase you can trigger the ability. And all the other Space Wolves on the board gets to both reroll charge rolls and reroll hit rolls in the fight phase. Much more reliable to get a bunch of things to combat and make them hit extra hard when they get there. Plus on top of that he gains a CP if he personally destroys an enemy unit. Might be a little bit dependent on him actually getting the finishing blow though, and not his squad. Otherwise you've also got the option to field him on Storm Rider. Upgrading to that does cost significantly more though, at 180 points rather than 100. For the big point premium you get twice the wounds, +1 toughness, and a faster moving mounted type profile. Otherwise fairly similar special rules. He also gains a few attacks with the flurry of teeth and claws from the Thunderwolves, though they don't really make him meaningfully more dangerous, with only 6 attacks at strength 5 and damage 1. Overall, compared with a few of the other chapter masters, I feel like Logan Grimnar's current rules are perhaps a little bit simplistic compared with some of them. A Terminator armored chapter master that hits with a few damage 3 attacks in melee, and then just has that one really big turn of rerolls, something that's going to be far more valuable the bigger the size of the game is, as that'll be affecting more models across the table when you trigger it. Overall, I'd rate the on foot version at a bit more powerful than the Storm Rider version. You're paying a lot less for his special rule, and his damage output is basically the same. I feel like Storm Rider's not terrible for the extra speed and durability. Thunderwolves are really quite good as well, and he could potentially lead them if you wanted him to. Overall, at the moment, I'd rate him a 4-star for his foot version, a 3 for the Storm Rider one perhaps. Seems usable enough for a massive turn of rerolls when the Space Wolves hit home. He is competing against a rather good cast of characters and a bunch of things that support Thunderwolves as well, and I feel like while he does see play in competitive lists, maybe doesn't really seem like he's auto-included in every single one. Moving on to one of the most righteous crusaders out there, and here we have High Marshal Helbrecht of the Black Templars, a mighty warrior who's gone toe-to-toe with many other big figures from the 40k lore. In game to field him at the moment, he's 105 points, and for that he has a 2+ save with his Artificer armor, has a particularly punchy combi weapon with strength 5, AP 1 and damage 2 with devastating wounds, and then hits very very hard in combat with the Sword of the High Marshals, 6 attacks at strength 8, AP 3 and damage 3, and a pretty good sweep mode as well, again with AP 3. Slightly outfighting Logan Grimnar here due to the AP differences. Beyond that though, at the start of the fight phase, he punches the enemy really quite hard with a bunch of mortal wounds. You get to roll a dice for one enemy unit. Usually you'll get either D3 or 3 mortal wounds before the fight's even begun. Pretty powerful to be able to threaten to smash a Terminator or something before he's even rolled the dice for his regular attacks. Beyond that though, for his leadership abilities, he can join either the Crusader squad or the Sword Brethren or Intercessors. He gives them all +1 strength, maybe quite nice for the Crusader squad in particular going to strength 5, and then also allows them to get a critical hit on a 5+, which works quite nicely in their Righteous Crusaders detachment where their Templar vows can trigger on that, or if he's in combo with a Castellan or a Primaris Lieutenant. Lethal hits on a 5+ really are quite big. Overall, between all that, High Marshal Helbrecht is really standout. The critical hit thing is really powerful with a Castellan plus Oath of Moment and Vows. Means that you could have sustained and lethal hits going on for his unit, or re-rolling the hit roll to get as many of them as possible on a 5+, with Sword Brethren or Crusader squad that deletes most things in the game. Pretty scary stuff overall. Plus beyond that, his own combat stat line is really quite good just in itself, with all those big attacks, and perhaps particularly the big mortal wound punch that he gets right at the start of the fight phase. Overall, I've chosen to rank him a 4.5 out of 5. Absolutely great combat punch for the cost, both on his own abilities and his buffing rules, and really quite common for Black Templars playing games in their Righteous Crusaders detachment. Finally, for our look at chapter masters in Warhammer 40k, we have Kaldor Draigo of the Grey Knights. The Grey Knight Supreme Grand Master is cursed to walk in the warp, but is often able to rejoin his chapter when chaos bleeds over into real space, and is able to join the fray on their side. In game, he costs 125 points and is a 7 wound Terminator character, really quite sturdy and hard to put down there with that great big shield of his. When he makes contact with the enemy, he can hit them quite hard with his Scourging psychic power, a bunch of fairly good Space Marine killing shots that gets Anti-Demon 2+. In melee, he gets the Titan Sword with a fairly impressive AP-4, and again that's Anti-Demon 2+ as well, which can be relevant. He can lead a Terminator squad and gives it a 4+ feel no pain against mortal wounds, really quite nice as that's one of the better ways for killing Terminators, though it's a bit less relevant now devastating wounds aren't mortal wounds anymore. But perhaps his biggest and most impactful ability is the option to get a +3 inches to his charge roll on one turn when he was set up from reinforcements using the Deep Strike ability. Usually that should mean that he gets a 6-inch charge against his chosen target, an 83% chance to succeed, rising to almost certain if you can budget a CP to reroll. Overall, between all that, at 125 points, Kaldor Draigo just adds loads of value to a Grey Knight army, so much so that he seems basically auto-include for almost every competitive list going. He's a hard choice to pass up. Grey Knights have lots of ability to jump around the table with their teleport assault, but often if they want to teleport in, they're going to be trying to roll a 9-inch charge if they want to get their fancy force weapons to work in close combat. So at least having one unit that's pretty much guaranteed to make it there and break something is really quite a big deal indeed. He works perhaps particularly well with the Brotherhood Terminators, as they'll get lethal hits on the charge, so he could hopefully make them deliver that. And that'd be helpful for his own melee as well, punching up against tough stuff. Overall, hard to go wrong with being very tanky, having a bit of meaningful shooting, good combat, and guaranteeing that he gets the first strike on the enemy. Between all that, he's very strong indeed. Overall, I've chosen to give him the full 5 out of 5 stars here. Within context of the faction at least, he is pretty much auto-include. So anyway, let me know what you think of the Space Marine chapter masters out there. If you've got an army of one of these chapters, do you regularly put your chapter master on the table or not, and how do they fare when they're there? Overall, I feel like Games Workshop hasn't done too badly to make most of them really quite interesting choices for their army in one way or another. Out of them, perhaps only Gabriel Seth really stands out as perhaps needing a bit of improvement in my opinion. The rest seem very playable indeed, and some of them like Calgar, Azrael, Draigo and Helbrecht seem absolutely stand out within their armies. In any case, let me know which ones are your favourite and why. Look forward to hearing your thoughts down in the comments. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep these coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.